So this may not be a popular way to say it. However, I tell everybody that when you work for me or work with me, you inherit a Jewish Latin mother. And that means everything that it means. It means you're always too skinny. You need to eat more. That means that you're going to have to WhatsApp me when you're traveling internationally so I know that you're okay and you've reached your destination. But it also means that I'm going to tell you what I think when I think it. And you may, to your point, you may not love it at that moment, but I want you to ingest it and I want you to think about it. And then we'll talk about it later. And I think that's really important. So, in addition to leading with kindness and being, thoughtful, I think that being honest is paramount. Because if you can't build an honest foundation with somebody, then there really is no relationship.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples, not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz, real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
Ego is a tricky beast. I've often had to fight my own ego in my career, but along the way, I learned this valuable lesson. When I asked myself what I could get done if my ego wasn't involved, and I saw the possibilities it opened, it helped me slay my own personal dragon. And we have that very same issue with our brands, my friends. My inbox is constantly overflowing with PR pitches, boasting about some leading brand or best in class, this or that. So a podcast guest application that came across my desk really grabbed my attention when I saw this lesson: lose the brand ego and lean into humility. Joining me now to share the story of the creative campaign that approach unlocked, along with many more lesson-filled stories, is Sandy Rubinstein, the CEO of DX Culture and DX Agency. Thanks for joining me, Sandy.
It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, let's take a quick look at your background so people know who I'm talking to. Many roles in her career, but if you want to highlight Director of Partnerships for GMC Trucks Cross-Divisional Opportunities at General Motors R-Works, VP of Marketing for Nickelodeon's Nick at Nite and TV Land, SVP of Marketing for A&E Network's Lifetime Television, and she joined DX Agency 16 years ago. DX Agency is a 20-year-old company with $20 million in revenue, and Sandy manages a team of 70 across 5 cities in 3 countries. So, Sandy, what is your day like as CEO?
A lot less fun than when I was in all those other roles. It's wonderful and challenging at the same time as incredibly stressful. The typical day can have anything from, having to deal with clients and nuances that they require, or employee and our HR team and any kind of issues that are bubbling up with a sizable staff. We often have, things that need addressing. But it could have, a brainstorm meeting in the morning and P&L conversation with finance an hour after that, and then pivot back to some fun shenanigans with a potluck with the staff.
As long as there's some fun shenanigans in there, I like
some
that.
Shenanigans. Yeah, life is about shenanigans.
That's nice. All right, well, let's take a look at some of the things we can learn from your career. I like to say I've never really been in another industry. I've never been a podiatrist or an actuary, but I feel like we get to make things, and I don't feel like everyone gets to make things. So your first lesson, you said, seek serendipity. So have you done this in your career, and how'd you learn this?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that maybe, I don't know if it's generational or just the way, we're brought up. My family's Hispanic, and, we were taught early on, have a direction, have a path. Everything has to be clear. You have to have a plan. And oftentimes I find myself in squiggly lines, which is where I like to live. I think that we're so focused on forward movement that sometimes we miss all of the things that are happening around us that could provide a pivot. So I think being open to those conversations as you meet people, you never know, why that person has come before you. I think there's some fun things that could happen that people miss. So I'll give you for instance, I was in high school. I was already applying to college to be a broadcast journalist. I'm sure you could already notice that, that would be a perfect career for me. And I was convinced that's it. I'm reading the news. This is my path. And I had a music teacher in high school who said to me, are you considering college? And I said, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. And she said, I think you need to think about going to music school. I was like, are you crazy? Who studies music? Like, you can't even make a living this way. I wasn't going to be the next Beyonce, right? But it just wasn't even an acorn of an idea. And she said to me, how about this? Keep applying, but I'm going to also set you up with 5 interviews and auditions. I'm going to teach you a piece of music. Mind you, I still didn't even know how to read music. She's like,
Wow.
I will teach you a piece of music. I will take you and I will play the piano to accompany you. And subsequently, she took me. I got 5 scholarships, and I would not have been able to afford to go to any of the universities that she got me access to. So I ended up saying, you know what? Maybe I'm not going to read the news. Let me do this and get a business degree because I might have a different path. So it's being open to the squiggly lines and saying, there's always an opportunity that you haven't considered, and it might not be the right one at the right time, but you should definitely keep your eyes open.
Yeah, there's a few words I love in life. Tenacity is one of them, but serendipity is one of them too. I just love that word. It's so appealing to me. But one thing I've learned in my life is, in my career, is yes, serendipity, but also when you put in that prep work, that can make a lot of difference when the thing comes along. So maybe not in your music lesson, but for us as marketers
Right.
and with our brands. And so one thing I want to ask you is, for example, you were a brand marketer at TV stations, I noticed. How did you make sure you understood what would work with the customer? So you had that background when something come along. So, for example, I interviewed Sarah Hodges, CMO of Procore Technologies, on how I made it in marketing. One of her lessons was you have to walk in your customer's shoes, literally. And Procore, it's a construction software company. So for her, she would literally put on boots, put on gloves, put on the
Oh,
gear,
yeah.
and go on construction sites and be like, oh, this is what it's like to drink coffee in the cold with these gloves on, and all these different things, right?
So smart.
And so that's, again, when we have these opportunities come up for our brands or companies, yes, there's serendipity, but there's also preparation. So can you give us an example maybe of, I know you worked as a brand side marketer at many major TV
Yeah.
studios. What did you do to get in the customer's head?
So interesting and a good parallel, I think. I moved to New York and I got a job at the Sci-Fi Channel. And I am not a science fiction fan. So in preparation, I actually went to Comic-Con a few weeks before I started the job, and I walked the floor, and I started talking to people and asking them, like, what is it about sci-fi you love? Give me the kernels. Like, let me understand. I said, I'm a newbie. I have no backstory. I don't even know who, any of the characters were. Um, and I actually spent 3 days at Comic-Con at the Javits Center. And by the time I started the job, I understood the audience. Whether I was a fan or not, I knew that I actually could communicate effectively to them because I had taken the time to do that. It's I think paramount to really understand the mindset, the interest, the things that make those nuggets that make the person tick. Because if you don't create a meaningful connection with them, it doesn't matter how good a marketer you are, right? If you don't understand what matters to them, you'll never be able to have them convert to take any kind of action.
That's great. And I love how you entered with humility, because there's something that we tend to do, as marketers in general, as people, but especially on the agency consultant side, where we feel like we've got to be the experts and know everything, right? That's why people are paying us. So to come in humbly, an audience like sci-fi lovers, but that's true in B2B too, like in many tech spaces where it's like you can't act like you know everything because you need to speak a certain language.
Yes, I now know more about the Star Wars trilogy than I really ever intended to know about Star Wars. But it changes your perspective. It changes the way you communicate. And you might think you have the most innovative, creative campaign idea, but ultimately, if it doesn't resonate with the audience that you're looking at, it doesn't really matter.
No, I love that. So, and speaking of that humility, I read this lesson in the open because it just struck me. Lose the brand ego and lean into humility. Now, I know we always have to say like our brands are number one. We're on this team. We're all the best. Like, how would you learn this lesson, and tell us the story behind this?
Yeah, I think foundationally, I like to really look at things from a lighthearted perspective. I think if we're not curing cancer or saving babies, everything has a solution, right? So I was at Nick at Nite, and we were going into a very aggressive upfront season. We're trying to figure out how to stand out. At the time, there's hundreds of cable channels, and everyone's going into the upfront. You're competing with linear, and we ended up coming in the ratings as number 2. And my boss was like, oh God, how do we deal with this? Like, we're not, we don't even have like a number one story. They're running all of the different Nielsen reports and trying to come up with a version that makes us one in some subcategory, when you slice and dice. And we're sitting in these meetings. And I finally just turned to the whole team and I said, stop. I said, we're number two. Like, how awesome is number two? And they're all looking at me like I'm nuts. And I said, let's own it. Let's just like be who we are. We can give a nod to the person who's number one, and that's great. And amazing for them. Well done. But we're number two. We're still on the podium. Like, we still get to play in the sandbox. And there's hundreds of people behind us. There's nothing wrong with touting the fact that we came in second. And I think people sometimes lose perspective. They're so focused on I have to be the best. I have to be the first. I have to. And there's a really amazing space to play in celebrating your milestone.
Yeah, that's great. I've also said too, another place I see it is earnings calls. Like when I used to have to go on earnings calls early in my career. So it's like, I would just never get it. Like this company made 13.58 a share and not 13.76 a share. And the analysts are like beating the executives. I'm like, they made a lot of money. Come on.
Isn't that crazy? Right. You still made a crazy percentage of increase year over year, or quarter over quarter. Yeah, but you missed by 2 cents.
And it's not what we projected, so we're mad. But wish I could have seen that New York Times ad. That sounds awesome. But let me ask you this. So when you think about brand ego, the other thing I think about is, and this is just kind of a natural human thing, is we often put our own goals ahead of the customer's goals, right? Do you have any example of like how you put the customer first? In Marketing Sherpa, we do a lot about customer first marketing. For example, when I interviewed Onesa Landis, Vice President of Marketing for Octane, one of her lessons was, it's not about you. And when you make it about you, you are never going to succeed. And she talked about working at General Mills, Glen brand. It's like their organic brand, and launching at Whole Foods these tomatoes, like normally canned tomatoes, but showing how natural they are. It was in a glass jar. But the problem is the launch failed because it was too expensive. And she admitted, she's like, the reason it failed and it was too expensive and all this is she's like, I was in General Mills brand manager rotation program. So I was only in that brand for a short amount of time. So my focus wasn't on how do I put the customer first and put out a product that's at their price point. My focus was on, I've only got a month more in this brand rotation and I won't have this, achievement for myself. Mm-hmm. So again, this is what we struggle with. As brands or for our clients, we need to get results, right? I mean, we ultimately need to pay the mortgage and employees, whatever it is. So, but how do you have any examples of, hey, like, yes, this is what we want, but here's how we can ultimately put the customer's needs first, and it's not all about our brand and our ego?
Yeah, I think that I'm trying to give you a really good example because I have actually a few of them, as you can imagine, being in television for so many years. We were launching a new show on Lifetime called How to Look Good Naked. And
I had the title right there. Yeah.
You knew I'd have a couple of these for you. And we thought we were putting the customer first. And we thought that there was really an appetite for women to reflect on, how their body shaming was a big thing in those years, about 10 years ago. And all of the magazines had moved to these, wafer models, and all of the commercials really did not reflect the American audience. So we teamed up with Carson Kressley, who was from Queer Eye from the Straight Guy, and he's adorable. And we started to market a show called How to Look Good Naked. And we felt that we were being quite clever. And you can only imagine with the title, we launched New Year's Day, biggest diet day of the year. And we came out with a whole ad campaign that had women in every body type in Times Square, sort of dropping the robe and posing naked. And what we realized is that we had not tested this show enough. We had not really sought out our viewers' perspective. And the amount of negative backlash we got from our viewers at Lifetime was incredible, because they felt that we were also promoting unhealthy bodies. And there was quite a bit of conversation, and it definitely, it was eye-opening. We thought we were incredibly clever. Happy New Year. I mean, the campaign was definitely a wink and a smile. But what I learned in that moment was that not everybody is going to have the same perspective. And what I hadn't done on that launch is really tested with different age groups, different ethnicities, and really looked at it from a holistic perspective. What we had done is only tested with our small subset audience. And this was a deviation from our regular and what was expected. So it definitely was a humbling moment, but also one that made me realize that not every consumer is going to just assume. I can't just assume that every consumer is going to have an appetite for the type of content we're putting out just because they are a consumer of our network.
Yeah, that's great. And I know for myself, being a creative, I mean, my background is as a writer and a creative side of the agency. I'm always a sucker for a good creative idea. And if you'd pitched me that idea, I'd be like, yes, go for it. But that's, as you said, kind of with sci-fi, we're not always the target customer. All right, well,
Correct.
when we work, so you've worked at many brands. When we work at the agency side, we work for other brands, but sometimes it's our own company as well, right? That we're running, and you
Yes.
are running a company. Whether it's an agency and you've got clients, you are running a company. And this is a great lesson. You said, bet on yourself. So how did you
Yeah.
do this as a CEO at your agency?
Yeah, it was about a year into my tenure, and our largest client represented 75% of our revenue. And, lesson learned, never have one client represent such a large percentage of your billing. But they gave us 30 days notice and took all of their operations with them. We had a full team, and I had a really difficult moment. I'd never experienced anything like this. I was never the owner of the company. I was always an employee at a big, network or brand or whatever. And not only is it terrifying, but you're looking at all these faces in the room of people who depend on you and their livelihoods and their families. And you have to make some really important decisions. We're a private company. We have no outside investment, nor could I get investment quick enough to, turn it around and make a significant impact. So it definitely took a few tough days of some soul searching, and I just knew that the talent I had was very creative. I knew that if we really had a chance, if we had time, we could make it. And I had to find a way to get that time. So what I ended up doing was my kids were little, and I don't recommend anybody do this in this fashion. But I went home and sat down with my husband. And we had a real heart to heart, and we ended up taking our kids' college funds and personal savings, and we personally funded the company for a year. Uh, but that gamble paid off because during that year we pitched like our hearts, depended on it, and we really made some significant gains and clients actually who are still with us. So it's in those moments where you have to have clarity, and fear can't paralyze you. And that's what most people, and when I talk to other business owners, that's what happens. The fear paralyzes you from taking any kind of risk. We made a calculated risk, but I just knew I had the right team, the right creatives, and that we really could pitch and win. We just needed a bridge of time.
So I like how you say calculated risk. I wonder, was there anything you did to make sure to know that it was a good risk to take, right? So, for example, I've been in that situation, different agencies. The first agency that hired me out of college lost a major client like that. I got laid off before I even started at that agency. Ultimately, the agency went out of business. I've been, work on companies that have gone through that and they've succeeded. And so I think I like this idea, but I want to make sure too for audience, we're not just
Yep.
kind of cheering them on. It's like, how do you act on this? And so, for example, I interviewed Christian Zhivago before, the president of Zhivago Management Partners. And one thing she did, and specifically does, is she interviews customers. And she says, after about 5 or 10 customers, potential customers, whoever your target is, you're going to start seeing patterns. You're going to kind of know. So again, I like that there's a good motivational speaker part of bet on yourself. But now let's take the marketing strategist, business strategist hat on. Was there anything you did to make sure, like, okay, this is a good calculated bet? Because in fairness, there could be people listening who are go through something similar. And the better thing might be to just, roll it down, whatever it is, file for bankruptcy, whatever that is there, and
Right.
not go all in on it.
Yeah, I think one of the things, because I hadn't grown up in the agency world, one of the things that I was able to look at is how does everybody else do it? Not looking at other agencies, but other businesses. And how do they mitigate? How do they prepare for risk? We were not set up properly to prepare for risk. So immediately we instituted a few things. One, and to your agency experience, all of our employees have to be monetized over 5 pieces of business. So if we lose a piece of business, I never have to terminate an employee. That is really important to us because I don't want my employees living in a constant state of fear. You'll never get good creative out of someone if they don't feel confident that they're going to have a job tomorrow. So that's one important piece. The other important piece for us was that we started building capital reserves. We had never really looked at, saving for a rainy day. I feel like my mother is talking to me all the time. But we really, as businesses, we're often so focused on forward movement and investing and hiring more people or getting more tools or whatever you need. But we really have to look at it also from a different perspective and say, okay, we've got all these people depending on us. We really have to make sure we plan for the future. And the final thing was we started actually interviewing clients and saying, what do you like about us? What would you like to see more? We interviewed people that we didn't win the business. And actually, it was wonderful. They took the time because most people won't give you any feedback. And we really drilled down with surveys and with one-on-one interviews. Really give us some more insight, give us some more tangibles that we can utilize to grow our business. And you'd be surprised how many people will help you, even though they didn't hire you, will give you guidance, give you advice. And what was the most interesting of that whole process was there were 2 people who ended up not hiring us in our first round, gave us advice, ended up becoming friends of the agency, as we call them. We've stayed in touch, and then they became clients. So really take a very broad look if you find yourself at this place pivot, and don't just look at other people in the same competitive space and their businesses, because not every business is built the same. Look out and seek out other types of businesses, other types of CFOs or CMOs in different positions, and ask them a lot of information. People will share with you as long as you ask. And that was, I think, the most important thing, that we really looked at it from a total outsider looking in and saying, how do we fix, how do we adjust, and how do we grow?
Well, that's good. They probably appreciated the steps you took, and they said, "This company, they're onto something." The way they're dealing with losing business. But the other thing that's interesting, I think you said, is that each employee has 5 pieces of business. Because just another totally different thing I've seen with some agencies is when you have a big account, and some employees only focus on that account, they almost work more for that brand than they do for the agency. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So getting them involved with other business, I feel like keeps them in your agency culture.
Yeah, it's hard. We've had some embeds, and those are things that you have to do for some clients, but it is definitely not our preferred method.
Yeah, for sure. Well, speaking of that culture and collaboration, so in the first half of the episode, we talk about things we make, but in the second half, we talk about the people we make them with, because that's what we get to do as marketers. We build things, but we build it with people. But before we get to that, I should mention that the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is underwritten by MECLabs AI, the parent company of Marketing Sherpa. You can get conversion-focused training from the lab that helped pioneer the conversion industry in the AI Guild, and a community to collaborate with as well. So grab your free 3-month scholarship to the MECLabs AI Guild at join.meclabsai.com. That's join.meclabsai.com and start collaborating. All right, let's talk about some people you collaborated with, Sandy. You mentioned Les Garland, an American music executive. And from Les, you said you learned to seek out every voice in the room. How did you learn this from Les?
Yeah, he is an amazing character. And I say character because he's just a huge personality. I met Les when I was in college in an elevator. And I was wearing a University of Miami sweatshirt. And, typical music industry guy is like, "Oh, did you go to the University of Miami?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "What are you doing there?" I said, "Oh, I'm studying music." He's like, "Oh, go on." And we just started chit-chatting about music. And he said he literally was getting out of the elevator, handed me his card, and said, "If you ever want an internship at a music television network, call me." So I ended up getting the internship, and I interned for him. And subsequently, when I graduated, they gave me a full-time position in marketing. And one of the most fantastic things about Les was that although I was, I like to say I was 12 years old, but I was literally a kid, right? I think I was all of 20. And I'm sitting in the back corner of this very crowded conference room with all the executives. And I'm in the back taking notes for my boss, who's at the table. And Les would ask everyone their opinion on different business items. And he'd go around the room and then he'd look around at all of the young people in the back. And he would say, "Hey, Sam, what do you think?" And here I am, literally all of 20, and I'm giving my opinion with a room of senior executives who are all very seasoned and very overqualified, and my perspective. But what it taught me is that every single person in the room has a unique thought process and has a unique perspective. And when you actually listen to all of them, you can still make whatever decision you want to make, but you have a very well-rounded view. And I've used that in business and in in my marketing campaigns, except for how to look good naked. And but it really does, and that's why I even try to hire not just visibly diverse people, but age and backgrounds and where they're from. Because for me, I think it's really important to think about everybody in the room having. They can all see the same commercial, and everyone have a different experience, right? So the more you seek out those conversations and the more you listen, the more well-rounded your approach can be.
So that was literally your first successful elevator pitch. I love that.
Right?
That was great. All right, well, let me ask you. So you kind of started talking about this, but now that you're the leader, how can you give a specific example of how you get people involved in the room? And I'm specifically curious
Yeah.
about when it comes to pitching, because pitching, we've talked about this before, it's so key for agencies for getting any idea across, right? So for example, when I've talked about pitching is essentially a presentation, I've written about presentations. One of the key things I talked about is put your audience first. I loved how before we even hit record, you asked me who's the audience. You were putting your audience first when we were talking about this. But I also realized, in your story, that's a great example. Like it was a music television station.
Mm-hmm.
You were probably in the target demographic for it. Sometimes the things we're pitching were not customers for. Like you mentioned sci-fi and some of the things before. I can also think of there's some just gorpy B2B products, industrial pipe fittings or OSHA compliance services, all this stuff where sometimes I have heard from designers or others like, well, I would never read this and I would never do this. And it's like, well, yeah, you're not the target customer. You shouldn't, this is
Yep.
for a specific customer. So I love the idea, get all the voice in the room, but how do you balance that with when you're creating a pitch for a company to make sure you're getting voices that are relevant to the actual ideal customer for that company?
Yeah, it's difficult. And I think post-COVID, and particularly in this Zoom environment, it's
Yeah.
even more complicated. You have to really seek them out. So I'll give you an answer that actually was from a pitch we worked on and submitted on Friday. And I'm in a meeting. Some people are remote, some people were in person, and we're going through the final presentation deck that the team has put together. And it was a couple days before Friday. I'm sorry, it was on Wednesday, and we were prepping the final tweaks. But they take me through it 2 days prior to submission so that I can, peep it, give any kind of guidance. So we're going through it, and I hear the same three people talking about everything. They're walking through, they're giving the explanations, the rationales. And I asked them to stop midway. And then I asked the people who hadn't spoken, talk to me about how you see this. Give me your perspective. You might not be in the right demographic. I want to know, though, as a consumer, what do you feel? How does this make you, does it make you want to engage with this product? Do you feel any kind of connection? And I think that is the most important thing, because what ended up happening is that one of the youngest people in the room, who is not at all the target audience for this product, said, "I don't get it." And you could literally hear a pin drop. The entire room stopped and everyone sort of turned their head. And she said, "There's no thread connecting the story here." And all of a sudden, everyone, like a light bulb went off, and everyone was like, "Oh God." Like we were so busy going through the motions, right? That nobody thought about the story arc and telling, how do we present this from beginning, middle, and end? And although the concepts were strong and everything, all of a sudden she just turned around and she goes, "What if you do this, this, and this?" And the entire room, everybody's eyes went wide and smiles came back. And all of a sudden the designer's like, oh my God, I could visualize it this way. And, some of the other teams members started to think about how that impacted their, submission and their portion. And that's why I think it's so important, because you never know, even if you're not in the target demo, perspective can come from anyone in the room.
No, that's so great. And I think there's a problem too with
Yeah.
meetings where it's like sometimes the loudest voices control things. And I got to admit, I'm sometimes guilty of being one of the loudest voices. And I got to remember to like let some other people talk.
Yeah.
And it is harder on Zoom because you can't read body language always,
No. And when there's 100 people on a Zoom and,
Yeah.
not everybody feels very confident. I actually have had all of our staff turn on their video cameras for every meeting. Said, I need to see your face. I need to see your expression. I need to see how you react. And I want your microphones on all the time, unless the dog's barking in the background, because I want you to feel comfortable in when an idea comes in. I want you to be able to verbalize it. But by the time you go find the unmute button on your computer, you might say, you know what, I'm not going to say anything, or the conversation's moved on.
That's good. Well, also, I think it's great leadership, separately getting a good idea for that pitch. I mean, that's great leadership now that encourages that young employee to see like, hey, they are a role player. Just because they're new here doesn't mean that they're not going to play a role. And so that's awesome.
Precisely. If we could get rid of titles, I think that would even be more wonderful, because I feel that sometimes young people feel stifled by the title of who they're talking to and what's on their business card. And I think oftentimes I tell our team, I don't really care whose title is what. I don't care if it's the intern or if it's the CFO. I want everyone to feel that they have an equal voice. And that's when you get good ideas.
Says the CEO. But, another problem with titles, I'll tell you, agencies, title inflation, who's not a VP? Like, that's the other thing, too. When you're dealing externally and trying to work with everyone, it's VP of everything. I like that idea. All right, this is kind of a more personal story from your career. You learned be the all-weather friend, and you said you learned this from Bill Rosalie, the former executive VP at Fuse Television. How did you learn this from Bill?
So I think what we lose sight of is we have a lot of friends when things are going well in our career. And when they're not, there are very few people who stand by you. And I found myself in a very difficult part of my career where I was coming off of a very bad experience. And I did what most people do. You retreat, hide is the wrong word, right? But you hide from the world. And I was having a really tough time. I was trying to think of what I was going to do next and what kind of pivot. And I was in a rough place. And it happens. And I think that's the part that I needed to come to terms with, right? Most people, you have success after success after success, and then all of a sudden you have a massive sort of roadblock, and it's very humbling, but it's also incredibly jarring. And as I called people, some people were nice, some people were they were an ear, but nobody really was like in it with me. And Bill kept calling me, and I would send him a voicemail, or I would take his call, and about 3 seconds later, I'm like, Bill, I got to go. The kids, the dog, the mailman, anything. And he got frustrated with me. He sent me a text that said, I'm going to be at this restaurant at this time for breakfast, and I'm going to have a seat for you. And if you don't show up, I'm going to be really upset with you. And I couldn't leave him at the restaurant by himself. So I went and met him, and he literally was like, you've got to stop. He's like, you're the only one living in this nonsense. He's like, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and let's go. What's the plan? Let's talk about how do we move forward. And he spent the next hour and a half of breakfast literally forcing me to talk to him about what were the action items I was going to take to move forward. And that is the most important piece to this story, that we all are there for the highs, right? But when people really need us, it's the lows. We don't check on each other enough. We don't push each other enough. I find often we don't lift each other up enough or celebrate each other. So that became sort of a pivotal moment in my career where I decided that I was going to be that person and pay it forward to others.
I mean, that's just beautiful. That's just beautiful human connection story, and I'm sure it's even harder remotely. Let me ask you, because I want to give you some credit here and figure this out, because you're talking about Bill, and we can all learn from Bill's actions. But I'm just guessing Bill doesn't do that for every single person he's ever come across. So what did you do to build that relationship with Bill? Or like, what do you do? But you've been through a lot of different roles now. Like, what do you do when you're going in an organization to build a relationship like that? Right. So for example, when I interviewed John Reed, the CMO of AI Identified on How I Made It Marketing, one of his lessons was be easy to root for. And I always remembered this because he talked about filming Adidas commercials with some up and coming rapper. And he said he was like so full of himself and he had this whole posse with him. And he was just like acting like he was doing a favor to film the commercial. And he's like, that guy never went anywhere. And he's like, but we filmed the same commercial with Michael B. Jordan early in his career. He came in using one of the themes of this podcast, totally humble. He wanted to serve us, didn't have any, hangers on. And he's like, and that guy has totally succeeded. And he's like, and that's what he said. I always try in my career for my brands and for me to be easy to root for. So for you, when like you've been in many roles, you've gone into leadership. But again, Bill saw you and Bill's like, this is someone I'm going to go to all this extra effort for. Good for Bill. But like, how do you build that relationship that does stand the test of even going through some bad times?
Yeah, great question. I think that lead with kindness. And a lot of people forget to be a real person. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I had a work colleague who had been going through a pretty nasty divorce. And when the divorce ended, I sent her flowers. I keep everybody's birthdays on a calendar, and I send a card with a handwritten note or a little something that I know, really moves. I have a friend who loves maple. So I seek out whenever I'm traveling and I find little maple candies or maple somethings, I buy them and just send them. And it's that just being kind, being thoughtful, being a human being that a lot of us forget. So when I go into an organization, even with a new client now at the agency side, I listen. I actually was pitching a client 2 weeks ago, and we were giggling because we're both Spanish, and there's a product called Fabuloso. I don't know if you ever heard of it. It's like a cleaning product, right? And we were giggling because when you didn't have money as a Hispanic, you couldn't afford Pine Sol. It was like the top of the the cleaning product guide. So you bought Fabuloso. And Fabuloso is purple and it has this smell. And we were both laughing so much about Fabuloso. And she's like, oh my God, my dream in life is to, work for Fabuloso. So fast forward, I knew her birthday was coming up and I sent her a case of Fabuloso. And that's it. And I didn't even put a card on it. She knew exactly who it was from. Just be thoughtful, be kind, and people will ingratiate themselves to you.
That's beautiful. Well, let's talk about one other type of relationship we have in businesses is that mentor-mentee relationship. You said you've learned that mentorship is not a one-way street. You learned this from Samantha Sichel, head of global digital at Live Nation. How did you learn this from Samantha?
Yeah, I've been blessed over my career to mentor a lot of young people. It's after 30 years in the business, right? You meet a lot of really smart cookies and you want to help guide them. But Samantha and I hired her to her first job. And it was at Fuse Television. It was music. And she was amazing. And when you just see a spark in somebody, right? They have it. So throughout her career, I've always helped her any kind of, work challenges or personal challenges that she comes into. But what she does for me is she helps me. She'll constantly teach me. She'll push me into ways that I've never really thought of. So I'll give you examples. She called me when she was at Live Nation, and she's talking about some technology and some product. And she's like, hey, did you know? And I'm like, I have no idea what you're even talking about. I said, you have to talk to me like you're talking to your mother. And so what she does is she takes me through innovations. And so now it's become a thing where she'll call me whenever she sees a new technology product coming out. And she's like, Sandy, you need to know this. You need to understand this. This will be good for your business. This is good for your clients. And so she actually guides me often. And then she'll, send me concert tickets to a show I've never even heard of. But it's wonderful because I'm there for her from a top down perspective, and she's there for me from a bottom up, and we sort of meet in the middle, and we have this really fantastic place to play in the middle. And there's 15-year age difference, but when we're together, it's like it's zero.
Well, and you bring up something great for anyone younger listening too. I mean, one thing when I speak to colleges, I tell them when I started out, I started at the bottom rung because I started in, with print advertising and these
Oh
sorts
my
of things,
gosh.
you know what I mean? And so it was like everyone else knew more than me, and I was learning from, direct mail or TV, radio, whatever it is, right?
Hmm.
But when kind of some things like social media, mobile, even AI and stuff now came along, I'm like, you have skills and expertise that this older generation is trying to learn. So like, yes, you still should come in humbly and come in entry level, but also realize like you've got this value to bring that like
It's
I couldn't when
amazing.
I started.
Right. This is digital native kids. These are, young people who grew up. My son actually works for me, and he comes in all the time and says to me, "Mom, you have no idea. You're missing the boat on this, this, and this." And I said to him, "You know what? Sit down, show me, explain it." And they're so excited to share, and they're so knowledgeable, right? The depth and breadth that young people have that just comes to them naturally, that we all have to really take a moment and try to understand. Um, it's amazing, but it's such a great sort of intersection for, I'm going to say, not young and old, but the experienced and less experienced, uh, where we can really meet in the middle. And a lot of those age lines have blurred, which is really cool.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you the same question about Sandy I asked you about Bill. How did you start this relationship? It's become two-way. But for example, I interviewed Erica White, the vice president of marketing communications at a firm, on how I made it marketing. And one of her lessons was direct feedback as a gift. And she talked about her time at Pandora when the CEO was so good about giving unfiltered feedback that is timely and actionable. And that is, it's a hard thing to give as a mentor, and it's sometimes a hard thing to receive because we have this human relationship dynamic where we don't ever really want to say something negative to someone. I mean, most people feel that way. It's
Hmm.
an uncomfortable thing. So take us back. How do you
Yeah.
start a mentor-mentee relationship?
So this may not be a popular way to say it. However, I tell everybody that when you work for me or work with me, you inherit a Jewish Latin mother. And that means everything that it means. It means you're always too skinny. You need to eat more. That means that you're going to have to WhatsApp me when you're traveling internationally so I know that you're okay and you've reached your destination. But it also means that I'm going to tell you what I think when I think it. And you may, to your point, you may not love it at that moment, but I want you to ingest it and I want you to think about it. And then we'll talk about it later. And I think that's really important. So, you know, in addition to leading with kindness and being, thoughtful, I think that being honest is paramount, because if you can't build an honest foundation with somebody, then there really is no relationship. So if I can't tell you, hey, I think, you're too skinny, or, you probably should have said it differently in this meeting. In the future, I want you to try it this way, then we don't really have a relationship.
What a good point. And I think we grew up in the same family, but that's a whole other podcast. You'll have to counsel me on that. All right, we talked about so many different stories from your career. Thank you for sharing them, Sandy. If you had to break it down, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer?
It's one quality. You have to be curious. And that curiosity spills into everything. But if you're not curious about the audience, if you're not curious about how do I make them take the action I want, if you're not curious about innovation, or the category you're in, if you don't take that initiative out of curiosity, then it's going to be forced and it's never going to be right. So a really good marketer is curious. They get under the hood. They look at, all of the way things work, or where are the intersections, where's the place that I can live or my brand can live, or the space, the allowable space for us to participate in. I think that's the key to good marketers. And I see it. I see it in the young people who come in. The ones who are curious, they have that fire in their belly. They have that spark. They want to know. The ones who aren't are always trying to force fit it in, and it doesn't work. So be curious, really look at every sort of opportunity and look at those squiggly lines.
Well, thank you for satiating our curiosity, Sandy, and sharing all this from your career. Thanks so much for being here
My
today.
pleasure. My pleasure. Anytime. I hope this is helpful to your audience.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you to everyone in our audience for listening.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.